Hello, Alaikum students. I hope you can hear me clearly. I'm Dr. Nazia Zia. I'm a senior lecturer at Physiotherapy Department. Today, we will discuss about the rehabilitation of the spinal cord injury. I'm sure you guys read about the spinal cord. So we will just go through the quick overview of the spinal cord, its causes, types, and classification. And then we will discuss about the assessment tools in rehabilitation and various rehabilitation measures which we use to achieve our goals in the treatment of the patient. To start with, let's define what is spinal cord injury. It is the damage to spinal cord results in the loss of motor and or a sensory function below the level of lesion. It is It is low incidence, that's not very common, but high cause disability, and it changes the lifestyle of the patient. It is divided into, broadly, it is divided into two main categories. One is the traumatic and other is the non-traumatic. The causes of the traumatic spinal cord injuries are road traffic accident, which forms the major 36%. Then sports injuries, self-harm, or domestic violences. The non-traumatic damage can result from vertebral subluxation if the vertebrae are not aligned, or so it causes compression onto the spinal cord and cause damage to the spinal cord. Spinal neoplasm or neurological disorders like syringomyelia. If we talk about the types of the spinal cord injury, it is divided into complete injury and incomplete injury. According to International Standard for Neurological Classification of Spinal Cord Injury, complete injury has no motor or sensory function below the neurological level and also into the lowest sacral segment, that is S4 and S5. So, according to international definition, what is the complete injury? The person has no motor or sensory function below the neurological level and also into the lowest sacral segment, that is S4 and S5. Incomplete injury. Incomplete injury is classified as having motor and sensory function below the neurological level, including sensory or motor function at S4 and S5 segments. So the difference is that the person have motor or sensory function at S4 and S5 sacral segments. There is one more classification, which is called the zone of partial preservation. It is defined as having motor and or sensory function below the neurological level, but doesn't have motor or sensory function at S4, S5 sacral segment. So that injected area is called zone of partial preservation, the area below the neurological level which has motor or sensory function is called zone of partial preservation, though it doesn't have sacral innervation at S4 and S5. So these are the three types which is broadly divided when we check the spinal cord injury patient. So these are the three types we come across. For the classification of spinal cord injury, the most common method is ASIA. It's American Spinal Injury Association Impairment Scale. It is developed as universal classification based on a standardized sensory or motor assessment. How we check the patient in the ASIA scale, using the ASIA scale, it's based on the strength of the strength and sensation. That is, it depends on the myotomes and dermatomes. In Asia scale, usually the motor aspect, 10 muscles are tested. You can see over there, there are the 10 muscles. 5 are innervated by the cervical spine, cervical nerves, and the 5 are innervated by the lumbar nerves. The upper 5, which are innervated by the cervical, are for the upper limb extremity, and the lower 5 are for the lower limb extremities. And in sensory functions, there are 28 key points. Like all dermatomes, C2, C3 to S4 and S5, we check by doing the light touch pinprick sensation to check the sensation of the patient. And usually the area which are intact, you can mark on it that it's the injected area. And in this way, you can differentiate that is the level of the Asia scale. The important thing in the Asia scale, it's the grading. Asia A, it's considered as the complete injury because it has no motor or sensory function below the neurological level, and also there is no motor or sensory function at these sacral segments, that is S4 and S5. As we have already discussed that in the international, according to the international scale, this is the main main definition. Now for the Asia B, from Asia B and below, it is all incomplete injury. In Asia B, it has sensory function below the neurological level and in the sacral segments, that is S4 and S5, but no motor functions below the neurological level. So Asia B, only sensory segments are intact below the neurological level, but no motor function is preserved below the neurological level. But the functions at the sacral segment, that is S4 and S5, are intact. Now, when we come to Asia C and D, in Asia C, motor functions are preserved below the neurological level, but more than half of the key muscles are in grade 2. Or you can say more than half of the key muscles are below grade 3. I'm sure you guys have idea about the muscle grading, that when we check the grades of the muscle, there are 5 gradings, that from 0 to 4. 0, it means that is just a flicker. 0 means there is no flicker. 1 is just a mild flicker. And in grade 2, full range of motion occurs if the arm or a leg is properly positioned with the gravity eliminated. So it means that in grade 2, more of the fibers are not intact, only mild fibers are innervated. So the extent of the damage or extent of the injury is greater. When it comes to grade C of Asia, it says that motor function is preserved below the neurological level and at S4 and S5 segments, and half of the key muscles below the neurological level is above or at grade 3. So what do we mean by the grade 3? That patient can move the arm in full range of motion against gravity. So patient, if you ask the patient to flex the elbow, you want to check the biceps muscle, the patient can flex the elbow completely against the gravity, and you can check in the sitting position. So the patient can flex the elbow and in the full range of motion, and when it's flexing, the elbow is going against the gravity, but unable to do so with resistance. When you apply the resistance, then the patient is unable to complete the range of motion. So if it is this condition, we will call it as a grade 3. And E is Asia E is normal motor and sensory function below the neurological level. So it means that if we see the Asia impairment scale, A is the complete injury, no motor and sensory function. From B onward, it's an incomplete injury, but in B, it's only sensory is intact. From C onward, sensory and motor are intact, but in C, the key muscles are in grade 2, and in D, half of the key muscles below the neurological level are in grade 3 or more. So what does this mean? It means that if the muscles are in grade 3 or more, it means that lots of extent of the damage is little, and the large number of muscle fibers are innervated and get the nerve supply. Now, when we're talking about, again, the classification of spinal cord injury, it is broadly divided into two main categories. And when we see the patient of the spinal cord injury, either you see the patient is the tetraplegia, or you can say a quadriplegia or a paraplegia. The tetraplegia, which is a complete paralysis, as we are saying, it's plegia. So plegia means a complete paralysis. It's a complete paralysis of all 4 extremities and trunk, including the respiratory muscles. So as the name says, you can understand that must be a higher lesion. It must be a lesion in the cervical or upper thoracic lesion. If it is a cervical spine, and if it is a higher injury, that's C2, C3, C4, then is the more respiratory muscles are involved, and the patient is in the serious condition. It might be on the ventilator, but below that, the respiratory muscles are involved, and all the trunk muscles, upper extremities and lower extremities are involved. If it is a plegia, it means that it's a complete paralysis. The other term which we use is paraplegia. Complete paralysis of all or a part of the trunk and both lower limbs. That paraplegia, both lower limbs and a part of the trunks, depending upon the lesion. If it is a thoracic lesion, you can say it is T10, T11. So the paralysis is from the below umbilicus, there is a complete paralysis. And if it is above, so T8, T9, so part of the abdominal muscles and the lower trunk muscles are also involved. Or cauda equina. What is the cauda equina? It is a collection of nerve roots in the lumbar and sacral region. And what is the cauda equina syndrome? The signs and symptoms of the cauda equina syndromes are saddle anesthesia. The most important is that saddle anesthesia. What is saddle anesthesia? Sensation in the perineum, anus, buttock, groin, and upper thigh. Bladder and bowel, and along with the saddle anesthesia, as is the lower sacral segment is also involved. So there is a bladder and bowel dysfunction. Then weakness of the bilateral lower limb. So if you find any of these conditions, you can say that the patient has paraplegia due to the neurological level of, for example, T10, T11, or due to the cauda equina syndrome. Now, this is just a brief overview, because I'm sure that you guys have already gone through in detail about the spinal cord injury and the spinal cord. So let's talk about the rehabilitation. When the patient comes for the rehabilitation, there are some tools which we use to evaluate and assess the patient. One most important and the international standard is the Asia scale. We have already discussed the Asia scale, that is the American Spinal Injury Association impairment scale, and in which we use the myotome and dermatome to check the patient. And in myotome, there are 10 key muscles, 5 of the upper limb and 5 of the lower extremity, and 28 key points of the dermatome from C1 to S sacral leg segments. And in this, When patient is classified to Asia A, it means that the injury is complete. And if there is Asia E, it means that there is normal function. In between Asia B, we say that only the sensation is sensory intact, but there is no motor innervation. And CD, there is sensory and motor innervation. In C, there is the muscles are in grade 2, and in D, the muscles are in grade 3 and above. The other scale which we use to assess the patient in physiotherapy especially is the spinal cord independence measure scale. This is the scale we use to assess the independence or ability of the patient to do the activities of the daily living. That how the patient is doing his daily activities. It evaluates 19 tasks and it is divided into 3 subscales. Here you can see the subscales. One is the self-care. In self-care, like feeding, how the patient is the patient able to eat by him or herself, able to use the arm properly, able to bring the hand towards the mouth. If it is, if he can do it, then maximal score is 3. Otherwise 0, 1, 2, we can score according to the condition. Then bathing, dressing. Well, in bathing or in dressing, the patient is able to use the upper limb or the patient is able to use the lower limb, and how the patient grooms him or herself. So we check these things and then we grade the patient accordingly. For example, if the patient is able to dress using the upper limb, so you know that the level of the injury is below. It's not the cervical injury, the cervical level, because if the patient is at the cervical level, the patient is unable to use the upper limb. Dressing. If the patient in the dressing is sitting on the wheelchair and still able to dress him or herself, then means that the patient has a good abdominal and trunk muscle. Even if the patient is paraplegic, but he can have a good abdominal and trunk muscle. He can bend forward, he can lift his leg and can dress properly. The other is the respiration and sphincter management. Sphincter management, that is bladder and bowel management, and the use of the toilet. Usually when we talk about the sacral segments, there is an impairment of the bladder and bowel function, because we know that bladder and bowel is innervated by the sacral segment. Then mobility, the most important, one of the most important thing is that mobility. Mobility is very important for the patient. So how the patient is mobile, whether the patient, if the patient is bedridden, is the patient able to turn from supine to sideline, or is able to sit from sideline to sitting position, or he can transfer from bed to wheelchair, or from wheelchair to toilet, or wheelchair to floor, or is able to shift from floor to wheelchair. This is the condition in which the patient is on the wheelchair. The patient is not ambulant. The patient is on the wheelchair. So you can check it whether the patient able to propel the wheelchair for less than 100 meters or 10 meters. What does it mean if we check that the mobility about 10 meters or 100 meters? It means it shows the strength of the upper limb. When the patient moves the arm, wheelchair, a patient propels the wheelchair, the patient is able to move the arm properly, has the strength to propel. If a patient can propel the wheelchair nicely, it means that he has a good upper arm, arm muscles, and a good grade in the upper limb. So this maximum score obtained is 100 points. High score means the patient is independent, and the lower score means that the patient is dependent. The other scale which we use is the walking index for spinal cord injury. The walking index for spinal cord injury is very reliable. It has 21 levels. Here we check the gait. that how the person is walking, whether the person is walking independently. If the person is walking independently, does the person has good gait? Is he using the proper swing and stance phase? Or then if the person is not walking independently, then is he using some technical aid, or is he using the crutches or walker or other orthoses like a long leg braces, which we will discuss later. And the grade is this patient is 0 grade, that patient is not able to walk, and 20, it means that the patient walks at least 10 meters without crutches and assistance. It means that the patient has good power. Now, to start with the rehabilitation usually starts in the acute phase as early as possible. When the patient is in the hospital, immediately we start the rehabilitation. The goals of the rehabilitation is to prevent secondary complications. What will be the secondary complication? Example, respiratory, as the patient is lying down, is in the supine position, is lying down. So need to check and work on the respiration and to maintain the range of motion and prevent any contractures and deformities, and to prevent pressure ulcers. So in the acute phase, when we check the patient, we check the respiratory rate, we check the range of motion of all joints and the muscle functions and tones. The main objective of acute phase is that to check the respiratory regime, to maintain the patient respiratory status as independent as we can, depending upon the level of the injury. If the patient has a higher level, then definitely we can't do much, but in the lower level, we use the deep breathing exercises to maintain the independent respiratory status. Respiratory management is very important. It depends upon the level of injury. Higher the level, more will be the complication. Patients with a higher cervical injuries require ventilatory support. The main aim is to improve ventilation by doing effective deep breathing exercises and to promote coughing. What will help in by promoting coughing? Cough helps in clearing the air passage from secretion that it. Hello. Cough helps in increasing the clearing the air passage from secretion, and it mobilizes the secretion and mucus. So how we do these things? There are some breathing exercises which is used in the rehabilitation to achieve this. One is the deep breathing exercises. You can see in the picture, this is the deep breathing exercise. We ask the patient to lie down in supine position on a flat surface. Patient is well supported with knees slightly bent. One hand is placed on the upper chest and other on the belly. Patient is advised to breathe in slowly through nose. Patient is advised to breathe in slowly through nose, letting the air deeply in, towards the lower belly. Then breathe out slowly, pressing lightly the belly. Repeat the procedure 8 to 10 times. It helps to strengthen the diaphragm. It is the primary muscles of inspiration. It helps to improve breathing control and mobilize secretion. I don't know whether you guys are getting all my points or not. You can inform me, you can write and inform me. Glossopharyngeal breathing exercises. It uses muscles. Glossopharyngeal breathing exercises is used especially for the higher level of injuries, and usually in the cervical injury when the patient is on the ventilator support. Usually you ask the patient to do gup, gup movement. What happens? Ask the patient to do the gup movement in which the mouth is open and pharynx is filled with air. As the mouth closes, the air is trapped into the oral pharynx. Mouth remains closed and force the air back to open the glottis and into the lungs. Glottis is closed and air is then trapped into the lungs. It improves the lung volume. Guys, just give me a minute. Okay. So this glossopharyngeal breathing exercises is be used the glossopharyngeal. मुझे ये पूछना था कि ये बच्चों के माइक अनम्यूट नहीं हो सकते, मतलब मुझे पता नहीं चल रहा कि उनको मेरी बात समझ आ रही है कि नहीं आ रही। मैं कर देता हूँ। हाँ कर दे। हेलो क्लास। जी मैडम, अब ये माइक ऑन कर सकते हैं स्टूडेंट। ओके, हेलो क्लास, please tell me that you're getting my point or not. Class?
Yes, ma'am, we're getting you.
You're getting it? It's clear? Okay.
Yes.
If you want to ask anything, please interrupt me in the middle. So these are the breathing exercises which we use to improve the breathing conditions. That deep breathing for lower injuries and when the patient is in the acute stage. And if we encourage the patient to do the coughing, so which mobilizes the secretions. Passive and active assisted movements exercises. Do you guys have idea about the passive and active exercises? Hello, do you guys have idea about the passive and active exercises? Passive exercises are exercises which the patient attendant or the physiotherapist is performing that exercises. It's done passively. And active assisted exercises is that half of the exercises are performed by the patient and half of the exercises are performed with the help of the therapist or the attendant. Passive exercises, if we are doing the passive exercises, it means that the patient has a complete paralysis in which the patient is unable to move the limbs. When the active assisted exercises is concerned, in which the muscle, if the patient has a grade 2, that patient can do the range of motion till mid-range, and after that, the therapist or the caregiver can complete the range. What is the benefit of these exercises? It helps in increasing the circulation. When we increase the circulation, it causes the increased blood flow and remove the waste products. We maintain the muscle strength and prevent soft tissue contractures and deformities. But while doing these exercises, we have to be very careful, because if there is an injury at the cervical spine, we will not do any movement of the cervical region, spine, and we will not do any movement of the shoulder like flexion and abduction and full abduction, because when we do the flexion and full abduction, the upper thoracic spine or vertebra also moves with it. If there is a lumbar or lower thoracic fracture, then we are not allowed to do the hip flexion. Full hip flexion should be below 30 degrees, because if we will do the full hip flexion, then it will causes the movement of this pelvis, and when the pelvis moves, it causes the movement of the vertebrae. we come to the active rehabilitation, the patient is discharged from the hospital, we'll go with the active rehabilitation. Active rehabilitation, there are two types of the active rehabilitation. Either we do the compensation therapy or we do the recovery of the function. In compensation therapy means use of alternative or new movements strategy. For example, if the patient has complete spinal cord injury at the level of T9, T10, we will first strengthen the muscles above the lesion, because already the patient has a complete paralysis, it's a paraplegia. But so how we want to make the patient ambulant, we want to make the patient active in daily living. So in this way, we strengthen the upper limb and the upper trunk area, so the patient can shift from bed to wheelchair, from wheelchair to the floor, or can do to the toilet seat, so he can be as much independent as possible. Or we can do the substitution, yet we can use some technical aids. If you want to make the patient stand, we can use long leg braces or walk or crutches to make the patient stand. So there are some techniques we use if there is a complete paralysis, and that sort of a therapy, which we say that it's a compensation therapy. Recovery of function, that is the restoration of the neuromuscular system. It is important, usually we do in the lower spinal cord injury, or when the ASIA is CD, where half of the muscles is in grade 2+ or 3. So we work on those muscles. We use many techniques, which I will discuss later. We will use many techniques to increase the muscle power and to make the patient ambulant as much as possible. Strengthening exercises. There are some protocol for using the strengthening exercises. We strengthen the innervated musculature. Initially, it is performed daily, depending on the patient condition. Later, 2 to 4 times a week, performing 2 to 3 sets of 8 to 12 repetitions. This we use to improve the endurance and the strength of the patient. Like you see in the picture, the patient is doing on the wheelchair. We can use the pulley system. In this picture, you can see it's a pulley system. The pulley has a weight at its end, and weight is used to improve the muscle power. It is used as a resistance to increase the muscle power. Or we use a TheraBand. TheraBand is the plastic band, which is a stretching material, and it has different resistance we use according to the power of the patient. And this again work as a resisted exercises to strengthen the muscles, but it should be the innervated muscles. Cardiovascular endurance training. Cardiovascular endurance training is very important. American College of Sports Medicine recommended endurance training 3 to 5 times a week, with total duration per day of 20 to 60 minutes. The duration and intensity of the training should be gradually increased depending upon the tolerance of the patient. We don't want to fatigue the patient. We gradually increases the activity, and in this way, as we gradually increases in activity, it helps in developing the endurance of the patient. Endurance training improves aerobic fitness. What are the things we use is such as arm ergometry. This is ergometry. It is like an arm cycle. The patient can easily sit onto the wheelchair and use the arm cycle to strengthen the upper limb. Or wheelchair propulsion. When the patient propels the wheelchair, see the patient is sitting on the wheelchair, it's propelling the wheelchair. It means that it's using the muscles of the upper limb, and when it is sitting, its trunk is well supported, so trunk is also working against the gravity. Bed mobility skills. Again, the bed mobility skill is very, very important, because if we leave the patient lying on the bed, it causes contractures and deformities and muscle atrophy, and also that it causes pressure sores. So we teach the patient bed mobility, that is transitioning from supine to sideline, or from sideline to sitting position, sitting onto the edge of the bed and sitting onto the and doing all the daily activities. The basic goal of rehabilitation is to make the patient as independent as possible within the patient's limitation. So in this way, here also we use compensatory movement strategies. If the patient has a weak lower limb, I use the upper limb and the trunk muscles to make the patient sit onto the edge of the bed. The one device which we use for this pain, neuropathic pain, is called transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation. Transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation is the low voltage electrical current to provide pain relief. It is a battery powered device that delivers electrical impulse space into, you see, these are the electrodes. We place the electrodes into the area where the patient has neuropathic pain onto the surface of the skin, and this electrode has adhesive, so it sticks to the skin. How the TENS, two theories which says that the TENS works. One theory is that the pain gate theory is that the electrical current stimulate nerve cells that blocks the transmission of the pain. As when you apply the TENS, there is a pinprick sensation with the pinprick, and we adjust the frequency according to the tolerance of the patient. So there is a pinprick sensation. When this sensation goes to the brain, then it blocks the pain sensation, and in this way it helps in decreasing the pain. Other theory says that nerve stimulation raises the level of endorphins, and which is the body's natural pain-killing chemical. So both these theories, according to both these theories, this helps in decreasing the pain of the patient, which is usually the patient has neuropathic pain at the time of the injury or after the injury. Other equipment which we use is functional electrical stimulation. Sometimes if you think that the patient, you want to walk, make the patient walk, and the patient has a weak quadricep which is supplied by L1, L2, L3, L4. So some of the fibers of the L4 is not intact. Only L2, L3 is intact, and the L4 fiber is not intact. So we can use functional electrical stimulation. Functional electrical stimulation is very effective. It activates sensory motor system through electrical current pulse, producing action potential in afferent and efferent neural pathway to stimulate muscle and generate movement. Here again, we have electrical pads. We apply the pads. For example, if I want to stimulate the quadricep muscle and I want to make the patient walk, and in walking, I want the knee flexion, a knee extension, want the knee to extend. Then I place two pads onto the belly of the quadriceps muscle. And when I open the stimulation, the current will passes. The current stimulates muscle, produces action potential in afferent and efferent neural pathway, and in this way it stimulates the muscle and it generates the movement. So when it generates the movement, it causes the nerve contraction, and nerve contraction causes the movement of the muscle. For example, if I activate the quadricep muscle, then when the muscles contract, it causes the extension of the knee joint. So exactly like if you want to get the dorsiflexion and eversion in the swing phase, you apply it into the tibialis muscle, and when you apply the current, the causes afferent and efferent electrical stimulation. And then in this way, it causes the movement, dorsiflexion and eversion, and helps into the swing phase. What happens? Why we are using this? When we use this, it causes the patient to improve the gait cycle, and when the muscles is continuously stimulated, it increases the muscle power. So in this way, also we can increase the muscle power, and we can increase the muscle power, and we can improve the neural plasticity and make the patient habilitate as much as possible. Another thing which is very important in technique in rehabilitation is orthosis. Orthosis is an externally applied device to support the limb, or you say to support the spine, and to prevent the movement. Sometimes if you see that in the picture, you see Minerva cervical or Halo cervical orthosis. If you see this, if you check it, Minerva cervical orthosis, you see that the patient head, neck, shoulder, and the thoracic region all are supported, all are immobilized. So it is suitable for definitely the higher cervical, the cervical spine injuries, where we do not want any movement of the cervical spine. And definitely when there will be the movement of the head, if there is a movement of the head, there will be the movement of the upper cervical vertebrae, or if there is a movement of the shoulder, there will be movement of the lower cervical vertebra. Again, the halo orthosis. In halo orthosis also, we stabilizes the head and neck. Then you see the thoracolumbar orthosis. The thoracolumbar orthosis is used to stabilize the thoracic and lumbar when we don't want the movement to occur in the thoracic and lumbar spines. Philadelphia collar. You can see the collar, it is Philadelphia collar. Here you see that minimal support is required. Here only when I want, or you want to only stabilize the cervical spine. So the extent of the damage is not that great, like when we suggest Minerva orthosis. Philadelphia collar, okay, you want to stabilize the spine, but the shoulder and the thoracic spine is allowed to move. Here you see the long leg braces, or I have a picture over here. This is the long leg braces. It is a brace which supports the pelvis, completes lower limb, block the knee movement, and stabilize the ankle joint. So mostly this brace is used in paraplegic patient when we want the patient, or it is in the paraplegia also, it is the lower segment where the part of the trunk muscles and the trunk innervation is there, the trunk movement is there, and I want the patient to stand using the crutches or the walker. So I use this long leg braces. Here the pelvis is supported, the knee is blocked, ankle is supported, so the patient can maintain the normal biomechanical posture. Patient can easily stand in a nice posture, and sometime, depending on to the level of the lesion, you can use as a compensatory treatment, you can use the pelvic muscles to ask the patient to walk with the crutches using the circumduction gait. So because our job is to habilitate the patient as much as possible. So this is the orthosis we can use to help the patient to achieve at least some of the mobility. This is the devices we use for hand. This is the hand resting splint. If I want this hand to kept into there is no movement in the upper limb, and I want to prevent the hand from the contractures and deformities, and I don't want my hands to get the contractures and the fingers goes in the flexion, and there's a contractures at the wrist joint. So we give the resting splint. Mostly we ask the patient according to the condition to wear as a night splint or 2 to 3 hours in a day, so that prevent the contractures and deformities. But here you see this is a dynamic hand splint. This, as the word says, it's dynamic. So it means that it helps in you see there is springs are attached. So here the dynamic, some movements are allowed. It helps in doing the movement. But when we suggest this dynamic handspring, when the patient has some power, if there is grade 1 of the muscles, definitely we will not give the dynamic hand movement, but dynamic handspring. But if you see that the patient hand is in 2+ or 3, and if the patient is, has unable to complete do the wrist extension to mid range but unable to complete to the last range, so we can do the give the dynamic handspring to increase the complete the range. So all these technical aids are dependent on to the condition of the patient. Here the wheelchairs, and this is the walker. Like you see that T12 walking paraplegia patient, we give the patient a long leg brace and give the patient a walker. A patient can use the trunk muscle to move forward. Or here you can see the patient is wearing the long leg brace and walking onto the parallel bar. And this is the called tripod stick. If the level of the injury is less, so you can give the tripod stick, or you can give the crutches or single stick. So guys, this is the rehabilitation of the spinal cord injury. I took this lecture from Suzanne O'Sullivan book for physical rehabilitation, and it's the 7th edition. If you want to go through that, you can easily go through that. So kindly just give me a feedback that you get somewhat a picture of rehabilitation, that what happens and how we do the rehabilitation of the cervical spine. Guys, are you there? Students, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, we got it.
Okay, so it's clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, students. Thank you very much.